Industrialization and global capitalism. The industrialization is the most important thing that ever happened in our world. Everything after this point in time can be directly tied back to the industrialization. It can be broken down into 6 categories: production, global trade, econ, transportation and communication, response to the spread, and social organization. There are 9 factors of production and why it began in Europe. Europe's location, the availability of raw materials, European population growth, urbanization, agricultural growth, private property rights, and the amount of rivers and canals that led to the transport of resources. Also, the access to foreign resources also helped, and their capital. Technological advances included steam engines, which brought new forms of energy from fossil fuels, factory systems that led to specialization of labor, the eventual spread of the European industrialization to the U.S., Russia, and Japan. The second industrial revolution that led to steel production in the later 19th century. Global trade is the second of the 6 categories. By 1900, Europe controlled 80% of the world's surface, or the Earth's surface. A question that's often asked is why? The answer is the Industrial Revolution. The factory system required raw materials. Europe went around the world to acquire them. Export economies emerged in Africa and Asia and brought on producing one single crop for the export to Europe. Agricultural economies declined around the world. Latin America was used as a mining center. Europe was not content with raw materials. They also wanted to acquire territory to use for markets, to sell their finished goods. Markets plus materials basically equals global trade. The third category is econ. Some key philosophies of this would be Adam Smith's view on capitalism, Mill's view on liberalism. Instruments that were developed were the stock markets, insurance companies, and gold standard. Transnational business emerged at this time as well. Transportation and communication also became extremely important during this period. Railroads, steamships, telegraphs, and canals were largely used. Canals being the Erie Canal in 1825, the Suez in 1869, and the Panama in 1914. Response to the spread varied in different places, but workers often organized into unions to demand better wages, hours, and conditions. Alternate visions of the future emerged, such as Marxism and anarchism. Marxism being in 1848 and anarchism in the 1800s. Some states resisted the change, such as the King in the Ottoman countries. Some states tried to industrialize, such as Meiji Japan and Russia. Government reforms also emerged, such as voting for women and public education, both in Great Britain. Social organization is the final category. The Industrial Revolution was such a huge shift that it eventually created entirely new social classes, such as the middle class, the industrial working class. Urbanization also emerged when people started moving from the farms to the cities. The new crowded cities led to poor living conditions in tenement housing and other such situations.
The Industrial Revolution was a domestic phenomenon that had international consequences. The most visible of these is the growth of European empires in the search for markets and materials, otherwise known as M&Ms. Many states from the previous era doubled down on existing colonies. Example of this would be the British India and the Dutch Indonesia. Europe, later USA and Japan, used their industrial advantage to build empires throughout Asia, Pacific, and Africa. The methods the West used in order to conquer these states were diplomacy, which was land they acquired via treaties, and warfare, land acquired and maintained via technological advantage. An example of diplomacy would be the Berlin Conference of 1884, and an example of warfare would be Belgians in the Congo. There was also economic imperialism. Not all acts of imperialism required a total takeover of pre-existing political structures. Often it was more lucrative to dominate them economically. And you can see examples of this in the Opium War and the Monroe Doctrine. A term to know is the settler colony, which were foreign family units that settled in new colonies. And as local population decreased, foreigners take that land, generally seen as racially superior to indigenous. Some examples of settler colonies are Kenya, South Africa, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Algeria, American frontier, and Australia. Western arrival influenced both the formation and contraction of states around the world. Some examples of formation are the American Manifest Destiny, the Russian expansion, and the Meiji Japan. Some contractions are the Balkan independence, Egyptian semi-independence, and Europeans in North Africa. Development of new states include Cherokee, Siam, Zulu, Hawaii, and the rise of nationalism include Germany and Liberian. Imperialism took place during the golden age of political cartoons, and so you can see many different cartoons depicting the effects of imperialism. This whole enterprise was facilitated by racial policies. Europeans justified their actions in numerous ways, and some of the examples are social Darwinism, which said that we are better because of science, the white man's burden, which was we are doing this because we care, and competition, which was if we weren't here, some other white guys would be.
The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement beginning in Europe that attempted to reform society using reason, logic, and science. Thinkers of the Enlightenment period were Voltaire in his Religious Toleration, Rousseau in The Social Contract, John Locke with Natural Rights, and Montesquieu with the Separation of Powers. A few documents to know was the U.S. Declaration of Independence, written by Jefferson in 1776. The Declaration of the Rights of Man was written by the National Assembly in France in 1789, and the Jamaica Letter by Simón Bolívar in 1815. The Enlightenment also led to political and social changes, such as women's suffrage, the end of slavery, and the emancipation of the serfs. Nationalism was born because of the common connections that people had with each other. This was also the factor that leaders used to unite countries. Revolutions were another result of the Enlightenment. The U.S. gained independence over Britain in 1776. The third estate in France gained independence from Louis XVI. In 1789, Haiti gained independence from France in 1791, as Latin America gained independence from Spain in the early 1800s. Other movements during the Enlightenment period were the 1857 Sepoy Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion. Some of these revolts led to imperial changes, such as the Tanzimat reforms in the Ottoman Empire and the self-strengthening movement in the Qing Empire of China. Political ideologies such as liberalism, socialism, and communism also came about during this time.
Industrialization, imperialism, and the rise of the global capitalist economy increased the amount of migration in this area. Causes for this included population growth due to improved agriculture and medicine, and improved transport. The migrants were often manual laborers and skilled professionals who migrated in search of work, either through free will or coerced labor such as slavery, indentured servitude, or convict labor. Migrants tended to be male, and women remained home filling in for the absent males. Ethnic enclaves were areas where migrants grouped in new areas, transplant their culture to the enclave, like Little Italy, Chinatown, or Germantown. There were also more anti-immigrant policies, like governmental prejudice against the migrants, and they tried to regulate the numbers of immigrants, like Chinese exclusion and white Australia.